In this video, I'm going to show you how to patch a short row toe. This is also the way to patch a toe-up toe that has your standard increases on the side. So as you can see, I've got a nice big hole here, and it's actually right on the side. If you have errant pinky toes or big toes, you might have this problem, and it's kind of a pain because it's right over your increase/decrease point for the toe. This is the mate to that sock, and you can see that this one's already been patched. And the way it's patched is basically you pick up along a row of the knitting in the toe, and you essentially just re-knit that section right over top. And you match the decreases or increases, whichever direction you want to go. And essentially, you create just a new little reinforcement. Now, as always with any kind of darning, if you see a problem in one sock, there's a really good chance you're going to find the problem in the other sock. Now, obviously, I didn't take my own advice because I patched this one, and the next time I wore them, the other one went. And then if you flip the socks over, you can actually see that the other side is starting to go. So before I wear these again, not only do I have to patch this sock, but I need to fix the other side of the toes on both socks. So be sure if you see a hole or a sign of wear on your sock, be sure to check the other sock or the other side of the same sock just to make sure you don't have matching holes forming. So to start, it's best if you have a little bit of the original yarn that you used saved up somewhere, but in this case I don't. So I'm just going to be using another color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 DPNs to pick up stitches along a row below where the hole is. So luckily, because this is very variegated yarn, I can kind of trace a row. It looks like, oh, this row with a red stripe looks good. And then you have to look to the sides, especially since this is moving inwards, you've got decreases here. Where is an appropriate column of stitches to end up with? It looks like right about here. So I want to start with this stitch here going across this row, and you'll go about the same distance over on the other side. So here, this pink one here, if I follow it down, and it's this row. So I just start picking up stitches. Now this can kind of get difficult, and you can see that here because this yarn is fairly felted at this point. These socks are 6 years old, so kind of expect that. So it's really stiff. So you'll probably, if you are picking up on the underside of a sock and you do kind of run into this problem, try going down a couple needle sizes below what you would normally think to use. So I think I probably used a 1 on these, and this is a size 0 DPN. And basically, the way this will work is you just start knitting across these stitches. Okay, so now I have all my stitches picked up. I've got my yarn prepared. So I've got my darning egg, I've got my yarn. I know my first stitch that I'm going to pick up is going to be here. So I'm going to insert my needle through that stitch. So right where it's really hard to see the V of the stitch because it is so felted here. But come through the hole so I can actually see what's going on. And then pull a little loop of yarn through. And then you kind of follow where you've picked up stitches and do that same thing. Now again, you can just knit right into the stitches you've picked up and do that from the front if you'd like. This just creates a little bit more of a seamless look, especially if you're using the same yarn that you started with. There's another stitch, another stitch. You can see I'm just backing the other needle out so I can keep an eye on where my row is. And so you just continue to do that across the row of stitches that you're going to pick up. Backing that one out, picking this one up. Doesn't matter how many, if it's an even or odd number, that doesn't matter at all, but what you'll see is that you'll end up with a new set of stitches to actually re-knit over that hole. So now we are ready to start re-knitting this section of toe. So essentially what's going to happen here is it's actually going to be a knitted patch that literally just reshapes and reforms this little part of toe. So this hole will sort of be left to its own devices. You can, from the inside, you can use the tail of your yarn to kind of sew down some of these ends, but otherwise it's basically going to leave the hole open. And part of the reason for that is because if you actually were to duplicate stitch all over all of this, you would end up with a much thicker, stiffer fabric, and in this particular area, that's not terribly comfortable. It's not so bad if you do it on a heel, because, you know, your full weight is on that, and, you know, generally speaking, you're not going to notice it as much, but your toes are a lot more sensitive, so you probably won't want that second layer of fabric so stiff in there. So, obviously you can see I'm going to be going in this direction, so this is starting on a wrong side row. Of course, you can pick up in the other direction. It's totally depends on what you like to do. So, it's a little awkward at first, I will say. It definitely is a little awkward, so you kind of have to find your own feel for this. But what you first want to do is just work one row across with just the stitches you've picked up. So in this case I'll be purling, which is a little dainty on these tiny little needles. And this just sort of establishes the new row of knitting away from the fabric of the sock. Now again, this is a technique you can really use anywhere. It's just in this case, on a toe, you kind of have a little bit of a special case here. This would also be the same if you are working an afterthought heel or a mitered heel. This is the same kind of thing that you would do to repair a rip in the mitered or increase/decrease section of that heel. And now we've got a nice row of stitches. It's like a whole new project. You can see, because of the way that I picked up through the fabric from the back, this looks exactly like the other knit stitches. If you actually pick up each stitch and then knit into one leg of those stitches, you will have a little bit of a twist, and it'll be noticeable and you'll kind of feel it, but it's up to you whether you care or not. So that's entirely up to you. On the next row, what you're going to want to do, because this needs to be actually tacked down to the column of stitches that you're working up. You know, you're never going to do any decreasing of the size of this patch of knitting on the edge, but you are going to knit it together with one of the stitches along the edge here. So every row will begin by knitting it together, or on the other side, purling it together with a stitch from that column. So the next row right here is this yellow stitch. So basically what you do is you just pick up a stitch from that column and literally just knit them together, and that's how you begin your row. Now I'll just decide now that I'm going to do my shaping on the right side rows. It's a little bit easier. So now the way I'm going to do the decreases, because again I'm working towards the top of the toe, I want to match what's already there. Now in this case, this was a pair of toe-up socks, so this was actually stitches that were increased right in here. In this case I'm going to be decreasing. So what I'm going to do to try to match these stitches here is I'm going to do a knit two together at the end of the first needle, which is in the center of this decrease, and then start the next needle with an SSK, and that'll create a pair of decreases that match the lean of the make one left and right that we're going in the opposite direction. So then I just knit to the end of this row, and when I'm ready to turn and begin working in the other direction, that's when I'll do the same, pick up a stitch from the edge and purl it together with the first stitch of this patch. So not much to see yet. It's kind of hard to make out. You've only got one row of decreases there. Once you get a few more rows in, you really do start to see what happens there. So here we're going to start wrong side row, and it looks like our next row is going to be this one here. Now this should be a little bit easier because this side is not felted. So I'm just going to purl these two stitches together and then purl across the rest of the stitches. Again, there'll be no decreases on the wrong side. And essentially you just continue working in that manner until you have either covered the section that has a hole, or until you have 4 stitches remaining. So you'll actually have just the knit 2 together, the SSK, and then 1 stitch on each edge. And then at that point you graft it to the end. So I'm going to keep working on this. We'll check back in after a few more rows. So as you can see, the little patch has been knit. You can see where it's been attached on the edges here to the column of stitches running up towards the end of the toe. Now, at this point, I'm going to actually graft the remaining live stitches right onto the fabric. And I'm going to put all the stitches onto one needle because that's going to make it an awful lot easier. And I'm going to do that from this side. So if you're familiar with doing the Kitchener stitch, that's exactly what you would do. And of course, because I'm going in this direction, I'll actually be going backwards. Come through the first stitch. Now this doesn't have to be perfect because again you're going to be grafting something straight to something that isn't straight, so it probably won't look 100% perfect, but that's okay. As long as you essentially follow the typical method of doing Kitchener stitch. And again, I'm doing this backwards, so a little difficult. And again, it's one of those things that all depends on your preference. You can also slip stitch or whip stitch the edge down. And then it's just up to weaving in the ends. And so that's a re-knit toe patch. As you can see, it's a little bit bulky, not along the side here, but there's going to be a little bit of stuff kind of going on here because that's where you've joined it with the other columns of stitches that were existing. But other than that, this follows the exact same shape as the rest of the toe, and it's going to be a lot more comfortable than if you did like a square patch or a woven patch or something like that. So now all I have to do is keep the other side from breaking, and if you see something going on like this, or you can see daylight through your stitches here, that's when it's time to do some grafting over that before it gets to the point where you need to do one of these. But if you do get a hole in your toe or in the side of a mitered heel, that is how you fix it.